Mr. President, thank you. Thank you very much for making some time for us.
Great to be with you.
It has been said, we just heard that climate change poses a particularly large public health threat. How good is the science linking climate change to some of these public health problems?
Well, I think that we've always known, or at least in the 20th century we understood, that environment has an impact on public health. I remember when I first went to college in Los Angeles in 1979, the air was so bad that you couldn't go running outside. And you'd have air quality alerts, and people who had respiratory problems or were vulnerable had to stay inside. We took action, and the air is a lot better, and incidence of asthma and other respiratory diseases went down. The same is true when it comes to climate change. We know that as temperatures go up, that wildfires are going to be more frequent and more severe. We know that as temperatures rise, insect-borne diseases potentially start shifting up. We know that in a very straightforward fashion, heat stroke and other heat-related illnesses and deaths potentially increase. And so what we're doing here is to make sure that in addition to public awareness around the potential for big storms like Hurricane Sandy or big wildfires or droughts, that people recognize there's a very personal potential impact in climate change. And the good news is we can do something about it if we take appropriate steps both to mitigate those effects but also to slow climbing temperatures.
Is there a message in all this for the average American? What's the average American to do when they hear all this?
Well, the good news is that in addition to having doctors and nurses, public health officials, schools of medicine joining together to raise awareness and to, in some cases, impact their practice. If they anticipate, for example, increased asthma incidents, then to plan ahead of time to deal with those. What we have is companies like Google and Microsoft that are going to take data that we're releasing and start developing apps so that potentially individual families are going to be able to monitor the air quality in their communities on a real-time basis. Communities can start planning for mitigation and prevention efforts more effectively. And hopefully the other thing that happens is that families and parents join with these doctors and nurses to start putting some pressure on elected officials to try to make something happen to reduce the impacts of climate change.
How enforceable is all this? I was reading that states will be given sort of the options and how they want to curb some of their carbon emissions. They may set up regional networks. What is to prevent a certain part of a state or a certain part of a region essentially becoming a dumping ground, if you will, while other states are cleaner and healthier?
Well, you're referring to our power plant rule that we're going to be issuing. And essentially the EPA is shaping a rule that says to each state, look, we're going to set a bar that you have to meet in terms of removing carbon emissions from the atmosphere, the same way that we set standards for the amount of other pollutants that are released. And we'll give you some flexibility in terms of meeting it, but you still got to meet the standard. And that'll be under federal law. So states will have to comply. We do recognize that different communities are going to have a different mix of energy sources. Some will have power plants that are generally on nuclear power or on natural gas. Others will be coal-based. They may have to make different changes and time it out differently. The bottom line is, though, we know how to do this. When the Clean Air Act was passed, not only was there terrible smog in Los Angeles, it was true in most metropolitan areas across the country. And the fact is that air quality has dramatically improved, and it's been much cheaper than anybody expected because technology adapts and people figure out how to do it. And as a consequence, the American people are a lot healthier, in addition to being able to see the mountains in the background because it's not covered in smog. And so we know how to do this. We just have to be bold and recognize and trust the kind of innovative spirit that the American people have always displayed.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Great to talk to you.
Great to see you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.